Superman is generally thought of as being the first superhero, and while others might make good arguments for Doc Savage or the Shadow, I thought we might go back in time a little and take a look at the characters that led up to Superman. Going back before Superman, we find the Phantom, and before him we have Dick Tracy in 1931. As we step back even further, we see Popeye in 1929. Of course, in 1928, we see the first appearance of Mickey Mouse, but you might be surprised at who is the oldest of them all. Yes, Olive Oyl from the year 1919. The comic strip named Thimble Theater started in 1919, featuring Olive Oyl, her then boyfriend Ham Gravy, and Olive's little brother there. Try not to roll your eyes when I tell you his name is Castor Oyl. Fantagraphic Books put out 11 volumes featuring the beginnings of Popeye, starting in Thimble Theater. Now there's about 11 volumes, and we'll start with number 6. These volumes covered the early work of Popeye's creator L.Z. Segar up until his death in 1938. We're going to look at some graphics from volume 6 in the year 1930. A lot of videos these days talk about modern comics, but my hope is to get you interested in these old Popeye stories, the 1930s especially. Popeye and Castor Oyl meet Professor Kilp, who offers them $1,000, which was a lot of money back in 1930, if they would solve a mystery for him. Professor Kilp decided to own some rental property, and he rented a small house to a doctor some 20 years earlier. But for some strange reason, the doctor never came out of the house. Of course, Popeye suspects that evil spirits must be involved, but the professor continues with his story about the mysterious conditions that surround the house. For the last 20 years, no one has entered the house or left the house, and the professor can't get near the house because of an invisible force prevents him from approaching the house. The professor hasn't been able to collect the rent in these 20 years. Then we get a note from the editor of the newspaper recommending that we clip each daily Popeye comic strip and paste them into a scrapbook. This is, after all, 1930, and even then it seems that they knew one day people would want these old newspaper strips in book form. You have to keep reminding yourself that this was well before comic books.
Excuse me, graphic man, but clipping comic strips out of the newspaper was done by numerous people. The most famous one I can remember was by Shel Dorf, who had amassed thousands of newspaper strips and was even interviewed by the Detroit newspaper, where they talk about the over 12,000 Dick Tracy strips that Mr. Dorf had clipped.
Meanwhile, Castor Oyl and Popeye investigate the strange house by asking the neighbors if they've noticed anything strange regarding the house that no one can get near. They ask a nearby farmer who witnessed the doctor moving into the house 20 years ago. The farmer tells them that a few days after the doctor moved into the house, that part of the farmer's field died suddenly. As the strange phenomenon that emanates from the house also affects the farmer's property, the farmer takes them to the point where even grass won't grow. Castor Oyl doesn't believe it and sets out walking towards the house. Popeye reluctantly follows Castor, but they both start to feel their heartbeats slow down the closer they get to the house. They soon reach a point where they can't go any further. They ask another lady who's lived in the area for years, and she has seen the doctor through her looking glass, but has never seen the doctor move from his chair. Castor Oyl sees for himself that yes, the doctor is just sitting there. He appears to be alive, but he doesn't move, and hasn't moved for 20 years. For some reason, Castor is able to take a few steps further than Popeye can. This doesn't make sense because Popeye is stronger and should be able to endure more pain than Castor. The only unique thing about what they are wearing is that Castor has an identification card in a copper pouch. Castor thinks if they can get more copper and wrap it around their chests, they might be able to get into the house. And after some more study, they do just that. With the copper wrapped around them, they make it to the front door. Then they make it safely inside the house and approach the doctor. Now, I'm not going to spoil the ending, as I'm hoping that this will get you interested in these old stories from the 1930s. There was always plenty of nonsense as well. Here, Olive Oyl shoots bad guys and then stuffs them down in the cellar, which is perfectly normal. It's at this point that you realize that Popeye must have been the first Superman. He gets shot often, but never dies. And he can beat anybody, no matter how big they are. He's a superhero. Although he would have to go to the hospital on the rare occasion. Here the nurse tells us that Popeye needs a surgery to remove the 20 bullets that are riddled throughout his body. Popeye would often get mixed up in the politics of smaller countries. Keep in mind, this was between World War I and World War II, and the threat of small wars breaking out was not unheard of. Here's Volume 8. Popeye returns to help King Blazo against the evil General Bunzo, who wants to be elected the new leader. For some reason, General Bunzo is able to sneak into the the Kingdom of Spinachovia and stuff the ballots after they told everybody they were going to call off the counting of votes and we could all go to sleep and they'd resume counting in the morning. I don't know where they get these crazy and totally impossible storylines from, but anyway, Popeye is disgusted with the elections and goes and finds his own country to rule, and the first thing you do when you take over a country is to control the media and make it look like you are the most popular ruler to ever walk the earth. So even back in 1933, Popeye was very timely. Here is Volume 9. In Volume 10, the Sea Hag returns and kidnaps Wimpy and Popeye's father. For Volume 11, I have the hardback version. Popeye, Olive Oyl, and a new creature called Jeep go and rescue Wimpy from the Sea Hag. The Sea Hag is about to stab Wimpy, but all of a sudden someone's knocking at the door. Wimpy uses this distraction to run and hide, but we find that the Sea Hag is very afraid of the Jeep. The Jeep's power are a mystery to Popeye, but the Jeep is able to paralyze the Sea Hag. Even though Popeye is a roughhouse and tough fighter, he shows remarkable compassion for women. Popeye and the group think the Sea Hag is dead, and she shows no signs of life. Popeye shows an act of respect by wanting to place the body of the Sea Hag into an easy chair, but even that's not enough for the soft-hearted hero. Without any further dialogue, our hero takes a pillow and places it beneath the head of the Sea Hag and walks away with his hat off. Now earlier I said Popeye was the first Superman, and I'm not the first person who's made that comparison. In February 1973, DC Comics had a story where a Popeye-looking character named Captain Strong took on the other Man of Steel. At first, you might think that DC Comics pulled another fast one with the cover, as when this scene finally takes place, it was someone else disguised as Superman in the phone booth. And we aren't going to see Popeye versus Superman, even though this Captain Strong does have superhuman strength, and just like Popeye, Captain Strong eats a weird seaweed to make him strong, like Popeye eats spinach. And this all comes from DC Comics, who sued Fawcett Comics for daring to have a superpowered character that they claimed was too much like Superman. Anyway, we at least get to see an actual confrontation, as Captain Strong is so strong that he can swim through air and punch Superman, and Superman can feel the punch. As the battle goes on, you get the feeling that Captain Strong might actually be able to win a fist fight with Superman, although Superman could probably use his super speed, ice breath, or heat rays if needed to. Captain Strong dives into the ocean to get more of the special seaweed, spinach-like substance, to finish off Superman, but Superman steals it from him. Just then, Captain Strong's body goes into withdrawal from his recent overdoses of his seaweed drug, and Superman races him to a hospital. DC Comics always likes to explain things, so we get this great dialogue telling us that the seaweed actually comes from another planet. And as we gaze upon the face of Captain Strong, we are reminded that he only has one eyeball, just like Popeye. Now let's look at some comics. Here we have a great Superboy book, It is number 174. It's from June 1971. The front cover is by Kurt Swan. I love books with crypto on the cover. Here's the splash page reprinted from Adventure Comics 262, artwork by George Papp. Then we have an EC comic reprinting Tales from the Crypt. The cover art is by Al Fieldstein, and this is the cover that inspired Don Rosa to his parody of the cover, putting Donald Duck in there and calling it Tales from the Coop, which I showed you last time. Speaking of reprints, here's a short-lived title called 4-Star Spectacular number 1. It reprints the Silver Age and Golden Age stories. Here's the splash page from the Golden Age Wonder Woman story. Here's 4-Star number 3. With a great cover by Ernie Chan. Ernie Chan is a great artist, and some guys like covers that have a shark on them. We'll get back to that. Here's the splash page from the Wonder Woman story. The artwork is by Ross Andrew. And since this channel is devoted to great comic book graphics, let's take a second to compare the two artists. On the left is Ernie Chan's cover art, and you see where he emulated Ross Andrews' graphic of Wonder Woman fighting a shark. There are subtle differences where he had to make the shark smaller so it would fit on the cover, and he gave her full red boots instead of the bootstrap kind. In spite of the differences, it's a nice tribute. Here's 4-Star Spectacular number 5 from December of 1976, showing Superboy being attacked by hawks with green kryptonite. In this Superboy story, Clark Kent is asked to help the stewardess by passing out milk and coffee to the passengers, which seems kind of odd, but hey, let's go with it. On board are Clark Kent's fellow classmates, as they've all been on a school vacation overseas, when all of a sudden Clark Kent bumps into the safety latch of the door and falls out of the plane. Clark could just fly back into the plane, but that would give away his secret identity. So he chooses to let the kids think that Clark fell to his death, as we hear their screams of shock. Then he lands in a small kingdom of Sardonia. And of course, Clark Kent, without his glasses, is mistaken for the future king of Sardonia, making this the 4,000th time a comic book company has ripped off the idea of The Prince and the Pauper, written by Mark Twain. Anyway, Superboy manages to save the kingdom and make the Prince of Sardonia look good, and then he makes his way back to Smallville. But it's been 2 weeks since he fell out of the airplane, and he merely strolls into Smallville and tells the people that Superboy rescued him, and then he slowly made his way back to America. Everybody is happy. But they didn't show the plane landing with those teenagers all freaked out because they thought they saw their classmate had fallen to his death. And then the teenagers all went to the home of Ma and Pa Kent and gave them the bad news that Clark fell out of the airplane. You can imagine how that was awkward. And this would have put Ma and Pa Kent in a touchy situation, as they would probably assume that Clark, being Superboy, wasn't in any real danger, but they probably had to go along with looking like they just lost their son for 2 whole weeks. We didn't see any of that, nor did we see Clark pick up a phone and make a long-distance phone call to let everybody know he was okay, but these are just funny books, so let's roll with the punches. And here's 4-Star Spectacular number 6. This would be the last issue of this reprint title. Here's the splash page of the Wonder Woman story. From Gold Key Comics, it's Little Monsters, number 17, from June 1972. I love Gold Key Comics. Now, this one is a reprint of Little Monsters number 5. Here's how you can tell the difference from a quick glance when you aren't able to open the book and you are having to buy them just by looking at a scan. Number 5 on the right has 12 cents on the cover, and the bats are more gray and brown, whereas my copy of number 17 has a 15-cent cover, and the bats are more cheerfully colored purple, green, and orange. I don't know if you're ready for this one. Here's Everything's Archie, number 26, from June 1973. This book is a little problematic. Everything seems to be in order at first, but instead of hanging out at their usual hamburger joint, the gang here is at a different restaurant, and they are critiquing everything that they would do differently. This upsets the owner of the Beef Barrel and argues with them. The gang end up leaving the Beef Barrel, and they wish they could start up their own restaurant ideas. They end up at Veronica's house, where Mr. Lodge overhears them, and he likes the idea so much so that he wants to invest in this new restaurant called Archie's. He calls two real-life businessmen named Kovacs and Blankenship, and they start planning the details. They even decide to start the first Archie restaurant in Joliet, Illinois. And that is the end of the story, because this issue has a companion story in a different Archie title. For that story, we need a copy of Life with Archie number 136, which came out 2 months later. And you guessed it. In 1973, Archie Comics were now telling you to visit Joliet, Illinois, and eat at their new restaurant named after the Archie Comics. Who could forget when Jughead got to meet the mayor of Joliet, Illinois, and meeting Bob Anderson, the president of the National Bank of Joliet, Illinois. These were real people at that particular time in the 1970s. The suspense mounts as the big grand opening is set to ensue. You can't believe that you are reading an Archie comic disguised as a commercial for a real live restaurant. If only they can keep Jughead out of the way from eating all the food first. Unfortunately, the Archie's family restaurant chain was short-lived. But it did see a second store open. The next restaurant opened in Maryville, Indiana. Unfortunately, the two existing locations were badly mismanaged, which prompted the Archie Comics to close them down and buy the stock back. Wasn't that a cheerful story? Now here's Lois Lane, number 40, from April 1963. The cover art is by Kurt Schaffenberger. Lois Lane has aged rapidly and is now too old to pursue Superman. And isn't it nice that Lois keeps a photo of herself on her desk at work to remind her of how she used to look? Here's Lois Lane, number 41. It's from May of 1963. Superman finds true love when he has a girl that is part Lois and part Lana. That's why Archie never chose Betty or Veronica. He was waiting for that in-between girl. Witching Hour, number 75. This is from November of 1977. The cover art is by Luis Dominguez, and it's a great cover. Hey, honey, what are you doing down here in the basement? Oh, nothing, dear. I'm just making this great little action figure of you. Yeah, that's it. And we're going to end on some Gold Key. Did I mention I love Gold Key? Here's some Dagar books. Dagar, number 4, from July of 1973. The painted cover is by George Wilson. You remember George Wilson, don't you? He was the neighbor that Dennis the Menace was always bothering. But when Dennis left him alone, he was able to do great covers for Gold Key like this one. Well, maybe it was a different George Wilson. And this issue of Dagar number 4 had a great advertisement for Daisy Rifles. That young boy in the ad isn't me, but it sure could have been. Reading comics is how I survived math class back in that day. Here's Dagar number 5. Now, it could be pronounced Dagger. I don't know. I would tend to pronounce it Dagar. Dagar number 5 from October of 1973. Another great painted cover. We assume it was by George Wilson, as his name pops up again later. Here's an interior page of original art by Jesse Santos. Dagar number 10 from December of 1974. Cover art is by George Wilson, and an online auction site was selling the cover art for this cover. So I was able to grab that. Not the art, but a scanned image of it. Once again, it's by George Wilson. And finally, I'll stop boring you and leave you with Dagar number 13 from October of 1975. Isn't that beautiful? Well, I don't know if you were supposed to really learn anything from this episode. It's more like story time with Graphic Man. But I hope you enjoyed it. And until the meantime, happy drawing, and we'll see you next time.